Well, thank you everyone for coming, especially you professionals who are giving up your Friday evening to be here with the SWA students who are involved in our student internship program. This is the 47th version of the SWA intern program. For 47 years, SWA has made the investment in time and in energy and in our good luck as professionals to share it with students. And just in this age of metrics, I've just kind of calculated that we've had about 7,000 applicants during that time. And our application process is really rigorous, and there have been about 500 people who've come through the internship program. The program involves that each of the students that were selected this year, we had about 135 applicants from across the world. We're very diligent in that we send out posters and messages via the internet months ahead of time. We request that they send us their interest, and it's a very rigorous process. Each applicant has to send a portfolio. They have to send 2 letters of recommendation. They have to send, and this year, and for the last couple of years, they've had to send a 2-minute video to introduce themselves to us. You know, not that it's a beauty contest or anything, but we want to know a little bit about who we're potentially going to invest our time in. And the 7 students that we have that you'll meet today came from this massive group of people across the world, and they're very representative of the university and the educational system. Some of them have been architects in other careers, urban planners, landscape architects, but they're a very diverse and interesting group. This is a 4-week process in Dallas, and during that 4 weeks, they've gone from kind of the metric side of stuff to the application of design side that you're going to see tonight. There's been many people who've given their time. We had, and just so I don't forget anybody, we had a number of guest professionals. We had, the likes of Courtney Garrett from Downtown Dallas Inc., Willis Winters, Arturo, who's on our board tonight, Jason Roberts with Better Blocks, who used to be our IT guy and used to walk around in our office saying, "What are you doing there? And what does that mean?" Now he has a worldwide business running around the world telling people how to build better streets and better neighborhoods and better environments. Francois DeCock, who's a very senior man at Half Associates, and Gray from SMU, who's on our jury tonight. And then we had each week, at least one, if not 2, of my partners were here and Jeff's partners were here to be the mentors for the program. And it's been a very fun month. Tomorrow morning, I understand, like at 6 a.m., some of them are leaving, but one stays here. Lorenzo will stay here in Dallas and be with us and actually work on projects with us and go to meetings with us and travel. And then the other 6 are going to our other offices, including John, who's going all the way to Shanghai. His first trip to China is going to be working for David Thompson, so let's have a moment of silence. So anyway, he's going to have a great time. He's going to learn a lot, just as the students have. And now I'd like to introduce my partner, Jeff Kraft, who's going to tell you about the projects.
Okay, thank you once again for joining us. I just wanted to quickly introduce our 3 guest critics today. We're joined by Arturo del Castillo from the City Design Studio. Wave to everybody. Greg Garman at SMU, and Heath May from HKS. So thank you very much for agreeing to join us today and to help guide the students through their next, mental phase of where their projects could be in the next few years. Just as a means of introduction to the process, for those of you who aren't aware, I think most of you are, we assigned very early on to the students 3 specific sites: the I-345 area, the Union Station area, and Cedars. We asked the students to, whether individual or beginning in groups, to really take a look at these sites and try to understand the physical form, to understand the culture of the place, to try to understand some of the sociological and political and financial or economic as well as environmental issues of these places. They began their first week by looking at the city's comprehensive plan, second week working in groups to try to apply some of the ideas, some of the thoughts as to what the city could be based on these particular sites. Then we asked them for weeks 3 and 4 to actually develop a big idea and then to project this into 100 years or more into the future so that they could really sort of begin to understand what a 22nd century city might be. And that city for them to study is Dallas, but I think we all know that the idea is that they take away these thoughts and be able to, over the course of their professional careers, begin to apply this to the cities in which they will be living in. So anyway, without any further comment on my part, I'm going to introduce Roy Chow, who's going to begin with the first presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ray Chao Lee, and I'm from Harvard JSD. I'm really excited to be here to share our crazy thoughts about what's going to happen in the next century. So my topic is about food, because food is fundamental to human beings. Even though the growth rate of population slows down, there's gonna be more population to feed in the next century. And compared to some other states in the States, Texas is easier to be threatened by shortage of food sources. And deficient of arable land and fresh water for food production, energy waste and pollution caused by food distribution, as well as the lack of grocery stores in downtown Dallas have many challenges. And in the traditional modes of food production, most of the process happened in the countryside, which led to that many people just ignore some necessary steps happened in the food industry. They only buy food and eat them. So the new proposal is gonna to create a farm system to bring the farm back to the city, to promote the production efficiency and decrease the pollution caused by transportation. So what's gonna happen in the future? Let's imagine, yeah. So here is my site in downtown Dallas. It's Freeway I-30, which is a linear space in downtown. And it's exactly at the location of the existing floodplain. However, it's covered by hard surface now. So the new proposal is going to create a green infrastructure and move the existing vehicle lanes underground to create a space for food production and dealing with the storm water management as well. Let's zoom into the site. In the neighborhood, the important buildings need to be considered, and some existing road systems should be kept to connect the two sites. And a linear space will be created to form a green corridor. And underutilized spaces, such as some surface parking lots, will be used to make some food production. And a water system come into being. So here is the existing plan now, and this is the proposal in the future, before and after. So basically, there are two elements in the food system. The first one is an agricultural park. Different plantation methods happens here. So it's basically a natural museum to show how the traditional agriculture works. And the sections shows the relation between the topographies and the different activities. Here is a view. And the second element in the system is these vertical farms. And there will be some polar system connecting them to transport food from one to another. And here is the form. It morphs from the horizontal to the vertical. And at the bottom of the buildings, there will be some orchard on the balcony aquaculture inside. And cattle and poultry are raised here as well. And at the top of the buildings, there will be a rainwater collecting system. And the wind energy is going to be utilized to make electricity to support the whole building, like to produce the vegetation. And there's another type of building which is mixed use. There will be some commercial and residential, as well as some open space on the roof. And there will be some skywalks connecting these buildings to create, so people have access to them. And there will be some high technology methods to promote the production efficiency and save the space as well. So let's embrace the future, and I think it's a win-win strategy for both the food production and the urban life in the 22nd century. That's it. Thank you.
At this point, we'd ask our guest reviewers to post some questions or comments.
So from what I saw last week, I think you've come a really long way, and I think especially sort of formalistically and really the amount of detail you've thought through about both how this system works and potentially sort of what it looks like, I think has come quite a long way, and it's very impressive. I guess I still would maybe have some questions about the level of engagement between individual citizens and urban farming, and I think I know that's not necessarily the challenge of this, but I think that the human being will always be a part of our city, and that level of integration is really interesting, because as it is right now, we're quite disconnected from our farming system. But I think as an idea, I think it's a really exciting future.
What I found most interesting about this is the impetus behind the issue of food shortage. We think about that in climate change, right? And we're under a period where the rate of change is climbing drastically. And it's very interesting to me to think about what kind of drove this idea. The way you're dealing with the food shortage is also going to help mitigate the actual problem that we have, right? The heat island effect, the rising temperatures, being able to collect rainwater where it falls. These are things that you've addressed, maybe even just by consequence of doing something else. And I think that's really interesting to see that happen. Addressing a problem in a roundabout way, really addressing the cause of that problem, but doing so in a way that can get you a stopgap measure from here to there. Formally, this image is a great one to talk about this. I really like the way that you've been very responsive and the curve of the way you start to meet the ground plane. I think that's a very it's a very beautiful and very soft way to deal with something. And when you contrast that with the idea that there's cattle grazing 7 stories above, I think the dichotomy there is something that's just extremely interesting. And the feasibility, I don't know at this point exactly how it works, but I think that could be something that could potentially be worked out. So good job.
Are there any additional questions or comments for Rachel?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. When Rachel first presented this, my brain, which is really small, thought, how do you bring urban or suburban idea of farming, a rural idea of farming to the city? But then I started, as I was driving home one night, I was looking at the amount of vastness, the land area occupied by freeway and infrastructure. And I think what Rachel is proposing here is actually fathomable in an era 100 years from now, whenever the petrochemical powered car may no longer be the mode of transportation, and that land gives way to something. And wouldn't it be interesting, the thing that's interesting about this theory is that you could limit or minimize the transport from field to table. Now leaves a huge carbon footprint. And so the idea that this could really happen in a 100-year span, I think is really interesting, also to the effect of how crop production and the agronomic production would improve the wealth of the city, the health of the city, the air of the city, the pollutant absorption of the city. So, I think it's a very interesting notion and really, really feasible in time.
Thank you, Jeff. First of all, beautiful presentation, and the graphics are really compelling. I want to challenge you to think about production of food and whether we will actually produce food in 100 years like we do today. The biggest question I have is I wonder whether we will actually have livestock. In other words, we most probably will only have a vegetarian type food. And I mention this because this week, I was at the stockyards, and I'm involved with the preservation of the stockyards. It's going through a huge transformation with new development in Fort Worth. And one of the people that have been always there, he's been there generations, Mr. Steve Murren, he's the one that always walks around, he's the cowboy of the stockyards. When we spoke about the preservation of the stockyards and the livestock industry, because that is what the stockyards is all about, he made the point, which I was so surprised. He said, the livestock industry is an important part of our history, but it doesn't mean that it will be there in 100 years' time. And actually, I thought about today, and I thought, I wonder whether it will be addressed. But think about that in terms of what we do today in terms of food production, knowing that to feed an animal, the land that is necessary for that, the resources compared to what it produced, compared to, say, any other product that's vegetative, that may also be considered and think about as part of this long-term process of food production.
Any last words?
Yes, I think in terms of this problem, I consider it in the very beginning because there is an invisible process in the system. It's like how to feed those cattle with the vegetation or crops they need. Actually, according to my research, they take up a lot of arable lands to feed those animals. So this is the reason why I create some buildings like this. I want this to be a self-sufficient system. Like everything happens within the tower. So the vegetation produced could support the lives of the livestock. So maybe I will develop more about it, how the ecological process run. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Great job. Autumn. Here we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Autumn, and Chinese name is Jingsi Yang. I'm from University of Pennsylvania and just finished the first year of landscape architecture and I have 1 year left. And before this, I studied architecture at China Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. And I'm very honored today to be here to do the presentation. And my project is urban artery. And what Dallas will be like in 100 years. My big picture of the future is that land will be extremely limited, and it's a global issue. And for Dallas, the transportation corridor is redundant. Maybe in the future, people don't rely heavily on the individual cars, but use more flexible transportation systems. So the areas of the transportation corridor is not of so much use. So as you can see, the existing condition that the transportation corridor is contain a huge space, and it's efficient. But it's an important network that can be the backbone of the city Dallas. So what if we transform this transportation corridor to something totally different that can provide the open space, energy, and mobility? So maybe in the future, this corridor is not anymore a barrier, but a soft and social infrastructure and can provide many activities and amenities inside. So people can, it moves people and touches people. So it's like an urban artery that can provide the things the city need to the organs and heart of the city. And I see it maybe as will provide everything people need in the future of the city. So based on the urban artery idea, I choose, I categorize the corridor into 3 different operations. Operation 1 line is kind of a linear area, and the node is where defined by the intersections, and the patch is a thick belt that occupy a lot of areas. So based on those, I will explain what exactly each operation is. So line is a kinetic system of people, animals, and traffic, and also it's the distribution of goods, nutrients, and energy. Node is a center that congregates all the flows, and it's an area for material processing and energy production. And patch, it's a thick belt, an area where people can live, work, and have fun. And the animal habitats are created here, and the food is cultivated. So I choose 3 typical sites to employ the specific operations, and it is a physical study of how to transform the freeway infrastructure into new infrastructure and produce spaces within the 3 operations of the site. These 3 operations, line, node, and patch. And this is the operation matrix to show how every 2 elements combine with each other. And it is how it's look like in 3 dimensions. And then I will show them one by one. So this is line operation and the energy distributions in it, animal migration. And this is operation node, material process, and energy production. And the patch, real estate, and the habitat. And because of the importance of the open space for people's living environment, the main pedestrian level can be changed to provide various ratios of open space as needed. And in the future, this system is flexible and can spur adjacent development. It's a self-efficient, balanced system. And this is what the urban artery like in the future. And as you can tell, this is the reunion tower on the side. And so it is functional, but not a dry blanket with futuristic machines. There are migration corridors here of elephant and giraffes. There are habitat and there are efficient transportations here, and people can live inside, and also like to produce food and energy production. And this is how the system works, the nutrient flows and energy flows. So over the years, the system takes root and grows into the existing urban fabric. And it is a totally different system that have the different mass, scale, form, character, and land use to what we know as Dallas today. So this urban artery is not an independent system, but it's contextually relevant. It has a symbiotic relationship with the heart and organs of the city, and this new connection will play an important role in rebuilding urban skeleton, adding biodiversity, and enriching people's life in the future. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Autumn. Heath?
I love this graphic. Really nice. I really applaud that you looked at such a breadth of the different entities that you started to gather and coordinate and collect here. You know, it was a nice curation of things that need to happen. One of the things that's very curious to me is what might happen if, rather than the typological selection based on the geometry, you know, giving you the top-down approach in terms of how you infill these spaces, what if you created more of a bottom-up approach by selecting a different criteria to kind of guide where these things were to happen? And then beyond that, I think, to me, the really interesting thing starts to happen when you overlap and intersect two of the different ideas. And I think a little further investigation into what could happen on those fringes could be really spectacular. But overall, really good job.
Yeah, I agree. This image, I don't think you had it last week. Is this new? Yeah, I love this. I mean, it's the line and node and patch, I think, is a really rich system that has a lot of information to it that can sort of grow in multiple categories. I mean, all of your typology grids show the almost infinite possibility, but showing this image then kind of humanizes it in a way that I think is so powerful. And I know it's a little bit cheeky and it's like an old spaceship and a giraffe walking, and there's some of these elements, but it's also sort of the surfacing of everything in our lives. Like energy now and water runs underground and animals move separately in our farms, and your sort of vision for the future is that everything is together. Like this is all surfaced material that is part of our new urban fabric, which is really visionary. And I also feel like a lot of 22nd century future is so dystopian, right? Which is everything is on top of each other and it's Blade Runner and it's dark. And yet this is a beautiful rainbow-filled waterfalls off of towers sort of. And I think there's, I mean, I just think there's something very positive and very refreshing in the idea, as rich as it is, and then it comes through in images like this. And so I applaud you how in 7 days you've kind of taken something quite rigorous and theoretical and created it as a real space.
Just quickly, if I can interject something, I think what Greg said is in leadership. I thought a world that can still value the Dallas Cowboys, but the elephants and giraffes have made it 100 years. Yeah. I think that's phenomenal. Jerry Jones lives.
Yeah, we need a white rhino up there as well. Yeah, I'm very impressed by the graphic quality of your whole presentation, and this is my first time seeing it. I hadn't seen it previously, so lots to take in. But one of your first slides struck me in the image that talked about overcrowding in our cities, and I think that's true in the way that we're moving right now. We've been moving for the last 50, 60 years in the way that we build cities. But I think if we were to do things and sort of change the way we think about our cities and maybe replace some of our infrastructure that might not be there and might not be necessary 100 years from now in the way that you've proposed here, then I think the overcrowding issue would not be one, and it would allow us to live a more fruitful life. I mean, a more connected life, a life where we're not having to scramble to go to very many places far away, and in fact, doing a lot of those things in one place. So I loved the presentation, very good work.
Any additional questions or comments from the audience? No? Okay. Autumn, do you want to say anything in conclusion?
I just want to thank you all of your help and like suggestion and critiques to my project. I think like I really learn a lot from you guys and think critically about what the future will like in city Dallas. So I think it's a good experience here. Thank you very much.
Autumn, the clicker. All right, Hina.
Hello everyone. My name is Hina and I'm from India. I did my Bachelor's of Architecture in India, and then I worked for 4 years, and then I came to study masters in landscape architecture at University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I'm in my second year, still have one more semester left. So vernix is this layer of membrane which we all are actually born with, including animals, and it's a membrane that protects us from the environmental stresses as we are coming into this new world from mother's womb. With increasing erratic weather conditions, we are choosing to stay within our regulated shells, which is delineating us socially and culturally. As a result, our public spaces have become deserted and are ignored. This proposal explores the idea of utilizing the public realm for introducing a new synthesis layer of skin that creates energy, stores water, improves the microclimate, and filters the harmful radiations. This would allow the surrounding buildings to draw their resources from the skin while simultaneously giving value to the adjacent public spaces as they directly maintain the skin. The skin would also encourage Dallas inhabitants to enjoy outdoor spaces, thus raising the awareness of the importance of connecting with nature and natural resources. Oops. So this is what Dallas was in 1950s. Full of life, full of people, activities, and this is what today it is. And where are the people? In this underground tunnel system, or in their cars, or houses, or offices. So basically in this contained environment, right, which we have created for ourselves. So the idea is, can we create this thermoregulative layer for our city which maintains the microclimate and temperature, and allow people to be more outdoors. Oops. This is the infrastructure of energy production today. So again, asking the question, can we bring the synthesis layer to the city, which takes sun, wind, and energy, the natural resources we have, and creates energy for future. This is the infrastructure of stormwater management, where we collect the water in the system and allows it to flow away. So can we have this new storage layer which captures the rainwater as well as creates water from the humidity and allow us to use this as a resource? And last but not least, the negative impacts of sun, which of course will be increasing with time. So can we have this defensive layer which protects us from the ultraviolet radiations and other harmful radiations that we will have in future? So basically, understanding this new matrix where we have nature, then our cities as a human intervention, and then asking, can we have this layer of consciousness which is very similar to this human skin, which is very similar to the human skin. So it's a defensive layer, it's a thermoregulative layer, as well as it's a synthesis layer, pretty much similar to what our human skin does. In terms of context, I chose my site in the heart of downtown. It's an area where there are a lot of parking lots, which I envision will be new buildings coming up. And again, taking this assumption that we are converting the main street into a pedestrian street, which connects the downtown with the Deep Ellum. So in terms of laying out the skin, it starts from this central spine and then flows into these other streets and then engulfs the new buildings and have apertures for other open spaces and parks. Showing how the skin starts taking the form. Sorry, am I too? Okay, so this, understanding that this is this layer of skin, right? And then having how the skin converts itself into landscape as well as allow people to move over it, as well as how the skin departs and becomes building. So in terms of going into detail how the skin would function is it has all these aspects of humidity catcher, storage and structure, using wind and sun, and creating this layer. Basically, this is kind of building a new public-private relationship where the private dollars are invested in creating and maintaining the skin, but it is applied to this open spaces, right? In the public realm, basically. Going to understand the pattern of module, and this is the individual module, which looks like, and when it is closed at night, it looks like that, and it is inspired from this Hoberman switch pitch ball. So during the day, it would be like this, as well as during night, it would be something like that. And because this is a dynamic skin, not necessarily the whole of the skin need to function in terms of all the 3 given functions. So some part of the skin would function differently during some part of the day. So this is what the insertion of the skin in this urban infrastructure would look like, where there are new buildings coming up which have their landscape on the top, while the skin integrates and becomes the building which merges into the landscape, but at the same time the landscape grows over the skin and the connectivity into these spaces. This shows the view of how the building looks and merges with the skin and landscape. And this is what it would be like to be under the skin. So basically, it is connecting people and bringing the energy, everything in one place, and collaborate them all together. Thank you.
Great.
I really love the idea of the skin, and I think that you've done a great job of starting to play with how it's going to integrate into the future city. And I think there's this nice balance between some of the old buildings still exist, right? I mean, we still have 500-year-old buildings now, so we will keep what we have. But, you know, sort of insinuating, I think it was the slide before this or 2 slides before, that there's this new building technology. Yeah, one ahead. This one. So there's sort of these, you know, new buildings are designed and developed around this new membrane system, which I think is really visionary and sort of gives a lot of new opportunities for, you know, both I think in your last image, you also had stuff growing down from the roof. So all of a sudden, there's kind of this extra plane of spatial conditioning that we have never had outside that now is potentially in the future a part of everyday life, which is really different. You know, I think we really take the sky, the ozone. I mean, there's all of these things that we take for granted because they just are so far up above. And now, you know, in your 22nd century future, that is a part of our everyday life, which is really exciting, and everybody looks really happy, so I like it.
Yeah, I like it as well. It's an incredibly complex system that you're proposing, and it makes me think about a couple projects that I've seen. One, an imaginary one that I think scientists have talked about before, and that's sort of creating artificial clouds to either create rain when we don't have rain, or to shade areas of our cities that need shade, and like Dallas, especially today. And then also, I don't know the name of the project, but that sort of white sculptural cloud that was designed and built in Sevilla, Spain, and how those two, that one being more of a sculptural intervention that also provides the shade and provides a place for gathering, and the other one being more done to do the shading and to produce some artificial rain. But I think you've combined those two ideas in a much better way that really adds a lot to our public realm today, and how we might imagine it 100 years from now. So I could easily see something like this, especially in large areas that don't do so well for many reasons, but I consider City Hall Plaza being one of those, a large expanse of concrete, and not very inviting, and not really doing much. Something like this I could really see not only the benefit of being underneath it and enjoying a better type of environment weather-wise, but also what it could do to bring all the other pieces of infrastructure that we have separate pieces in our city now doing the work, all under one sort of umbrella. Very good work.
You know, this is such a simple move, but it's such a beautiful gesture in the way that it gathers and unifies the city and the different spaces, not only the buildings, but the spaces and the gaps, the in-between spaces, right? And at the same time, I like that it creates new spaces. You know, as you mentioned, it's not just about the ground plane to the sky anymore. There's this stratification and these layers, and that becomes just much more rich. And you know, and I start to think about, you know, questions about what else could it become. I really like that you really dug in with some rigor to kind of determine what the system is, and the idea of a multivalent system that's doing multiple things, right? It's providing shade, it's capturing energy, it's capturing water. You know, can it become a circulatory system to deliver you know, the nutrients of that energy to the city in some way? That imagine you build another building, maybe you don't dig for power lines or attach into an overhead. Does the net become the actual grid? Is that an exchange of information? And then, you know, we're looking at some things like this right now, and you know, think even further into the future. And you look around, a lot of people have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit now, some type of biometric feedback, right? So can we start to crowdsource that so this can start to have a response with people? You know, if I'm hot, can we shade me and not a building or a space? You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I really like that you looked at it on these different granularities and scales, you know, from the actual mechanism of the piece itself to the overall ecosystem and the way that those systems reinforce one another. So really good job.
I particularly appreciated the fact that you captured a certain quality of Dallas, this idea that it's a hot place, that it's not, we don't utilize our open space for a very specific reason, and you thought there's a solution to this. And part of it is this idea, this private-public partnership, which I think is really important. And the energy industry in Dallas, can you imagine patenting this technology that plugs into these buildings and generates energy? We wouldn't have to pay for this in our public spaces. It would be paid for by private dollars, and we would get a great amenity. So, actually, I should say, any additional questions? Any?
I thought part of Hina's brilliance was the analogy to the human skin.
Oh,
you know, as what an obvious analogy, yet one that's probably overlooked. To think that our skin does everything that you've asked this membrane to do, but I do wonder how birds fly through it.
I really want to support what Chuck said. That was what impressed me a great deal, was that you actually, it's like mimicry. You look at what some other element in nature functions, how it functions, and you apply the principles to your solution. That's the one thing that really stood out. The other thing that stood out to me is that you address the issues of the day at the time, in 100, 200 years' time, when we will really be having even more so environmental issues, exposure to the sun, et cetera, you've addressed that. And then lastly, what I find very compelling is how that membrane changes day and night and becomes this different form. That was beautiful, you know, from a graphic point of view and an artistic point of view, and how that then links to the ecological side of things. It's beautiful.
Any last words, Hina?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I have to thank, of course, the whole team, and each and everyone had played a significant role in developing this idea. But I would definitely like to thank Gerdo and Jeff, because it really came out from their discussion. And when I was discussing this idea, and Gerdo really pressed on saying that you have to think something which has not been done until now. And so how you do things which have not been done, you know? And so, yeah, it was a great learning experience. Thank you.
Tien?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tian Wu, and I'm from Ohio University, and just finished my undergraduate landscape architecture. And my project topic is Topo City. So, okay. So in the 22nd century, for the increasing population and very faster consumption of the limited natural resource, so that will be the current way of how we live. So I think a modern city will be sort of genetic creature, it is expected that urban developers will need more self-sufficient in the future. So my goal was to generate a form that would create a diverse topography and would function as reuse capture water and also to sufficient energy. So after the second wave from our study, I'm studying the Cedars side, and after that, keeping this side. Because Cedars district was not being developing for a long time for the couple issues, such as like building construction quality, and also because development of the north part on North Dallas downtown. So this area was a lot of potential here, but however, this district was cut off from the highway, and also this place the city cut by the river. So my project were proposed to connect the Cedars to the city and the river. Okay, so this is the current skyline of Dallas. So let's imagine how it looks like after 100 years later. So is it gonna be looks like this? So that could be about, so let's think about what is missing from here. I think we're missing natural. We're missing the sense of natural. So I would propose like a form, how to diverse form, like to bring the form that how very diverse photography form, and also can function as the water drain system, and also can provide energy production too. So I reached the form from a range mountain. So because this form brings offering the very photography films, and also can have the films. Yes. Okay. So this is the existing water drain system. So I try to analyze it and create the new stream water system, bring more the stream water system more consistently. And overlay the existing street grade and get these new shape forms, and can bring all the surround condition and have the connection to the city. So, and also give a more addition function to the building construction, such as the solar panel for collect the solar, and the green roof can capture and fill the water, and also like the courtyard can capture skylight. And the vertical use of the mixed use of the building for different types of programs. Oops. So these diagrams show how the water drains through the terrace structure and eventually go down to the low point, and also the way to make its own way to the river. So this section shows how give the comparison shows how the dynamic way to the currently Dallas. So this experience, when people walk through this site, they can have a very different view of the city, and also have the view to the river. So have creative this very strong version and the physical connection between the city and the river too. And also the green roof can create the very natural sense of people for the future residents who lives there. And also like the diagram show how the structure capture the water and for reuse the water for the daily life. And in the daytime, how they keep the capture the green energy. So I think I created this new form to give to redefine how it looks landscape architecture in 22nd century, and to create this very livable environment for people. Yes, thank you.
Arturo?
All right, this is an area of town that we've been doing a lot of work in the last couple of years and trying to reimagine the rebirth of the Cedars. The Cedars at one point was a very vibrant community that got displaced over the years by industrial uses. And I think your specific proposal for the site, to me, seems very, of all the sites that were given for you guys to choose the most realistic one that this could happen in, because of a lot of vacancy, underutilized land and such, and the idea of having, creating these buildings that also provide this sense of topography, as you've mentioned, that gives Dallas something to look at, something to have in the background or something to go towards, is incredibly exciting, and as a point in itself, a lot of the world-class cities that we look to for inspiration have some sort of topography that is the reason for why they're there, maybe, for instance, or something that's just beautiful to look at and draws people from all over the world. In this case, I think not only have you done that, obviously, but you've created them into buildings that do more than just house people. They do all the things that you want buildings to be doing 100 years from now. So in my opinion, very, very nice, and I think a great site for it. And I think also a natural jumping off point to how do you connect our city to our river as well, in sort of if you look at downtown connecting to this area, the Cedars, to the river, I think a very natural progression. So very good work, thank you.
I like that your vision for the Cedars has eliminated a lot of things about the city, as maybe in particular Dallas has a lot of issues with, and I noticed that there are no cars in the Cedars now, right? Like, you've sort of completely removed the city grid, you've put this new natural topography and natural system on top of it, and thus have completely transformed the way of life in the future. This idea, honestly, I saw this, and although the color and the scheme doesn't look like it, it reminds me so much of West Africa, which is almost entirely how the communities are built around these sort of, they're much more natural, they're kind of the earth, everyone is walking everywhere, you kind of have your own garden, there's community spaces. It just felt like a very, I don't know, there's something kind of like deep and instinctual about the way that you chose to design this. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that, the future is about re-engaging with our natural resources, and our buildings are around that, and we're collecting rainwater, and we're engaging with the river. And I think the potential as sort of community building and for people of the future seems quite incredible. The form is really interesting, and you're right. I mean, Dallas is a very flat city, and it's kind of was invented as a spot between two different places because John Neely Bryant ran out of supplies on his way to go west, right? So we've always kind of been not for the natural resources, but just for the spot that we were. So to kind of turn it into something different and give us this opportunity to rebuild a part of our city is quite exciting.
I think for me, this is most interesting sectionally, looking at the diagrams where you kind of start to slice through and see what's happening on the inside and the outside of this. And I think that's where you were most successful kind of explaining, the systems of what you were achieving. When I look, I wonder, what would happen if you started to introduce, perhaps some bias in terms of how you look at your criteria. A mountain range is kind of formed from plate tectonics or volcanic activity or something. What is the catalyst for why these are where they are? Maybe they're biased for solar orientation. And then thinking about, we always have a choice when we decide, do we kind of mimic a natural form, or do we put kind of that mark, or you leave the tooling path of a human's hand in it? And I start to think, when I look sectionally, is there an opportunity to maybe carve away one side so you have this more of a contrast between what's happening on one orientation versus another? And is there a way that these can begin to orient themselves to stitch back into the city, or to lead people and draw them in and out or to another spot? But overall, I think it's a very compelling idea and something that's really interesting. And I really like the lack of cars in there. It just makes you want to just kind of, casually stroll through and kind of check it out. So.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Chuck?
My partner Jeff made a comment going into this that he saw the 22nd century being full of Zaha Hadid buildings, right? Because she's really learned to look at nature in the way that landscape architects look at nature, and that I'm hoping that architects will learn to look at nature. And I think that this is really interesting. I actually think this is how Dallas in the 22nd century may look. I think the scale's a little wrong because it's really hard to imagine the scale of the 22nd century. But this, like the skin analogy, seems really appropriate in that it's implying that man has figured out a way to be less vanity-oriented towards architecture and more natural systems-oriented towards architecture. And that, if you break this down to a little mini scale, this is like an anthill, how ants build. And, it's built to shade them as they're working on this side and gain volume above ground so the air is permeating into the ground. And like Heath said, the idea that the transection of this would turn and accept the sun, in 100 years, there's no doubt that this is going to be a really hot place to be, a really formidable place to live. So if you can let mud and technology and nature and grass, the way they do in West Africa, kind of collide into a Zaha Hadid type of thought. And, I'm not a big fan of Zaha Hadid. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I imagine that architecture is more informed by natural systems, landscape systems in 100 years, more than it is about the latest glass technology or steel technology, but it's more about the skin idea of protecting humans that are living beneath these forms. And I think this is fascinating.
Any last comments, Tian?
I want to say, I really want to appreciate everyone that have done any critiques and suggestions for my project, because I never gonna do this without your guys' help or your guys' suggestions. So thank you so much for the experience.
Hello, everybody. I'm John Wishmeyer. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I finished 2 years of my MLA at The Ohio State University. My project is a Mind in the Gap. It is a plan that will address the horizontal and vertical spatial gap that Dallas will deal with at the riverfront in the near future and definitely in the 22nd century. The 22nd century will obviously be formed by things that we have done in the past and things we're doing today. And a lot of trends that we're seeing today are increased development in downtown and especially in the districts around downtown, including West Dallas. So in the near future, Dallas will definitely be mind in the gap when they think about developing that area. So in the 22nd century, Dallas will address the riverfront as a development opportunity and transform it into the epicenter of a new downtown. So basically, by taking the riverfront and instead of building to it, building through it, we can connect two different places and make it potentially a new downtown area and maybe the first of its kind for Dallas. And this area will also be a synergy of the built and natural environment because in the future, places won't just serve one purpose. It'll be a culmination of multiple uses happening at once. So the riverfront will no longer just be an open park space. It'll also be an urban living environment for people to live and work there. So here is the context of Dallas. We all know this, the freeway system. Being an outsider coming into this city, it's very obvious that Dallas is a car-oriented city, and this is one of the major connections that connects people throughout Dallas. And you can see in the center here that the core of the downtown is bound by the freeway system. But something people don't think about too much is the Trinity River corridor system that runs through Dallas as well. And this is going to be a huge amenity in the future that we're maybe not thinking about so much today. And these yellow lines you can see here are the links that connect both sides of the corridor. And this idea kind of reinforces the notion that the corridor is something to just go over or pass over and not really spend any time in or give much thought to. And right here towards the urban core, we can see that there are multiple connections. So this is a curious spot, and I wanted to look further into connecting an area in this zone. So here we have present-day Dallas. We can see the freeway system kind of binding, encircling the downtown. It's disconnected from the riverfront, and it also speaks to how we think about development at the riverfront today. Here we have a jail, we have surface parking, and we have the freeway system. So the riverfront is really not a place that is desirable for development today, but I think in the future it will be. So in the next 50 years, a lot of development is going to happen. We're going to have better technology. We're going to have developers who want to get a lot of things built. And in Dallas, there seems to be unrestricted building codes. So a lot can happen in a little amount of time. And so we're going to see the downtown creep closer and closer to the riverfront. And we're also going to see West Dallas get closer and closer to the riverfront. But what's important is the space in between these two areas, the riverfront. And I'm also imagining that in the future, because of all of this increased development, that Dallas will probably implement a growth boundary. And so this line you see right here is what I'm imagining to be the new growth boundary so that Dallas can expand. But I don't see it expanding around here. I see it expanding further away because that land is easier to develop. And so pointing out again that the riverfront won't just be a riverfront anymore. It's going to become part of the urban fabric. Also in the future, Union Station is probably going to be a really important node in Dallas. It's predicted that it will be the station for high-speed rail, bringing people from out of state, from other cities, and even maybe a central point for people who commute through Dallas. And so having having this node on axis with this portion of the riverfront, I feel is very important. And so this is why I'm looking at this area for potential development. So to achieve this, I'm looking at 5 strategies. The first is to re-engineer the Trinity River, which will in turn shape how the topography and land form around it. Looking at different building typologies, creating open space, and then connecting all of this from West Dallas to downtown and through the riverfront. So this is what we have today. As many of you know, the river was engineered to look like this. It was moved about a mile from its original location, and it's primarily serving a function. It's not so great to look at, and it's really not, from my experience, highly used. So I did a study of looking at natural river meanders and just looking at the spaces and shapes that forming the land differently can give us. And so this is an idea that I came up with. So this could be potentially the new Trinity River that runs through the riverfront next to downtown. And so looking at these curves, I decided that the land should be more dynamic. And so by pushing and pulling the land to create landforms, the gray forms are brought up to reinforce the natural curve of the river, and the dark gray are depressions so that in flooding events they could potentially become wetlands and future park space. So also looking at building typologies, and in this scenario the building typologies are formed by the land that they're in, so all of the buildings in the depression areas would deal with water and other natural events a certain way, so the buildings would all have a certain form, and the buildings on the higher land would follow the same with a different form. And so then creating a connected park space that would run through the center of this system. And then connecting everything with a surface that I'm calling the people plane that would connect downtown and West Dallas through the riverfront on a plane that is pedestrian only, that's connecting the buildings, that's connecting both sides of the river, and that would allow people access to go down to the riverfront as well. But it's not just talking about the riverfront, it's talking about connecting these two systems. So the park space and pedestrian plane would finger out into both sides. So looking at this in section, we can see that this stretch of the riverfront between West Dallas and what I'm calling Old Downtown is about a half mile of just flat open space. And during flooding events, the water, it's very functional. The water can rise and people can still cross using all of the multiple bridges that we have. But the proposal that I'm suggesting drastically changes this topography and gives people a wider variety of ways to interact with the riverfront while still staying connected, so that during flooding events, this space is still activated with this plane. So what does this kind of thing look like? So this is a perspective of coming from the downtown, entering the space. You can see that the plane connects all of the buildings and gives people a lot of options to meander through, and it's shaded and it's welcoming. So once you're going through, the main thing to point out here is that there are ways to connect down to the riverfront in multiple locations, so that you're not just entering in one spot and exiting another spot. You have a variety of ways to interact with the riverfront. And this is looking at the ground plane of the riverfront once you've entered one of the park spaces, looking up. So looking at a site plan, we have this proposed site connecting the corridor, linking to both sides of the river. Thank you for minding the gap, and this is to point out that this square right here is about a half mile by a half mile, and it's a fairly small space, but it's to point out that even a small area in the future could make a really big change for the way people live in Dallas. Thank you.
I want to start by saying I really like all of the sort of information that you gave leading up to the reason why you chose this site. I thought that you have a really clear visual aesthetic that sort of distills down the information to help tell your story incredibly well. And so much so, even kind of looking at from me looking at your perspectives and your drawings, starting to see Dallas in a slightly different light, which is quite impressive. I really like that you chose the river bottom itself, because, you know, intuition would say no, like you wouldn't build on the river, that it would never happen, it's a natural resource. But I think also there is kind of this reality that the potential of growth and expansion will require us to have some plan of action for developing everywhere. And I think that you've actually done quite a nice and sensitive job to, you know, build. Yes, you're sort of re-engineering something that's already been re-engineered, but you are, you know, building in parks and sort of the engagement of the human level across multiple sectional scales and the buildings. And I think it gives sort of the correct mindset for trying to plan ahead for the future. And I think, you know, it's different. I mean, everything is curving, all the buildings are curving, and I think it is a bit visionary. It's not just downtown sweeping over a river and leaving it behind. It's really, truly a nice integration of what both our natural landscapes and our built landscapes could look like. So well done.
Yeah, very interesting proposals. I like the idea of the growth boundary, and I know other cities have it, and maybe that's what's necessary here to have something like this occur here. I could imagine that with a growth boundary such as the one you've drawn, development really being pushed to do something like that, and then the river really becoming sort of the next frontier for the city. And I think 100 years from now, we can imagine that the way we deal with our stormwater would be very different. So perhaps some of the limitations and restrictions that we currently have as to what we can do there, build there, would be gone. And then you could do something like re-engineer the river, add topography, add structures and buildings and such. Another thing I want to add is the idea of minding the gap, stitching the east and the west. And we've always thought about that, I think, in recent terms with the park itself, and really just the park, and not so much a new part of the city in terms of structures and infrastructure and such. So I think it's a very compelling idea, and one that would require, and I think need, a lot of other advancements in technology to get it done. But I mean, if we're thinking 100 years from now, I think it's really a good step and a good future to look forward to.
Nice job, man. That was a really well thought presentation. And I want to talk a little bit about that. You know, in the beginning, the diagrams, the pace, the cadence that you went through, the information was delivered very professionally. So excellent representation of that. You know, where do I start with this? There's so many good things going on. First of all, you know, looking at the gap, I've always felt like, you know, that's a very legitimate strategy for thinking about Dallas, is not thinking so much about what we have, but what's in the spaces in between what we have. And looking at this particular place, the way that you started to you increased the surface area and you brought two sides together in a way, it's like a finger joint in wood joinery, right? You know, you made it stronger than it would be the way they are if they just touched each other. One of the things that I would very curious to see if you flip-flopped the depression and the rise, so that instead of the parks reaching further across, maybe you got some more built structure, infrastructure moving. And then I'm also curious to kind of see how the architecture might interface with the landscape a little bit, you know, at the people scale. But I think that was very well presented. It's a really, really interesting and intriguing idea, and I think I haven't seen anything that's really gone to that length to talk about why right there and how you might do that other than the park. So great job.
Actually, John, I have a question. I don't think you've adequately addressed the idea of transportation. So, and I know you've thought about this, so can you please share, how do people move through this site?
So it is something I maybe talked about in the previous weeks, but there would be transit lines that run through this space, and I'm imagining that in the future, the buildings themselves would be the infrastructure that supports the transit lines, and they would still run at the same level, this dotted black line right here, that is on grade with both sides. So the lines would run through the buildings, they'd be supported by them, and I'm imagining that they would either be mass transit or autonomous vehicles or something like that. But I purposely left them out of this idea because the idea is to create a pedestrian-only plane that is putting the city life on people and not on cars. So they would still be there, they would be hidden, and they would still be connecting both sides. Does that address it?
Chuck? Anyone, Chuck?
Always. Actually, I think Arturo and our three jurors kind of hit upon my thoughts, but I think it's fascinating. I thought what John was getting at here was to think that the limitations of structural support will be gone in 100 years. Think about nanotechnologies or whatever other technologies that exist in 100 years, to think that you could go columnless for a half a mile. That is not beyond reason in 100 years, right? And to think that cars will have a different, and to me, this is a bit of I mean, if you were to take this scheme and marry it to Tien's scheme and let that architecture inform this idea, you know, to me, this is what I think Dallas may look like in 100 years. And I think the fact that the Trinity River has, in my 37 years of living in Dallas, has been this shoelace that nobody can really figure out a way to tie. I think this actually is a way to figure out a way to tie the shoelace. I think that floods will be more profound in 100 years, but I think the fact that you figure out technologies that allow you to disregard the natural occurrence, the natural flood, and allow that gap to be minded or mended or stitched is fascinating. I think he's a really great job, John.
You brought meaning to something that right now doesn't have a lot of meaning for a lot of us because it's so bland.
Or that we've never figured out a way to bring it to.
I just have one comment, and that is to say that, you know, as Chuck said, that technology will change, and we don't know what lies ahead, but people will never change. We will be the same as we are today. I believe so. But the point is that the way that people will use space will probably also be the same. And the one thing that you mentioned, I think, was very important, because that's a principle that everyone that works in the outdoor environment that creates parks and open space should be aware of. And that is that you said at one point you provide many options of accessing that space. That is essential and crucial to any public space. The success of a public space requires as many as possible entries and exits. It's a safety issue, it's a perception issue, it's an experience issue. All those things are very important, but that is applied in the sense that you mentioned that, and then you take it through in your final design as well. Kudos.
Any final comments, John?
It is incredibly difficult to speculate on 100 years from now in a city that I'm not so familiar with. It's even more difficult to do it in a couple weeks. But I'm really honored to have been a part of this program and met so many wonderful people. And thank you all for being a part of it too. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is, I need to step back a little bit. My voice is really loud. So my name is Lorenzo. I'm from Italy, Rome, and I'm currently doing a master in urban design and architecture in Glasgow, Scotland. So I had my undergrad degree in Rome, and then I moved to Scotland, and I'm here. So first of all, I really want to thank everybody for this opportunity to come in here and listen to us. So my project name is Healing Web, and I'll tell you later why. So first of all, the starting point is to connect the city, and more important is to connect downtown to Deep Ellum, because I strongly believe that downtown will expand towards Deep Ellum in terms of following the existing grid. And what is preventing this? Scars. With scars, I mean the wounds left by this car-centric era in the next 100 years. And the point is how we're going to heal the wounds left by this. Probably that could be taking advantage of the existing, of the space left by the previous planning. And with this, I really mean the highway, so the space left by the highway, which actually is not utilized at all now. So the area of focus is, is this area here, which I think is really important because it's the central point of these two existing grids. I don't know if you can read here, but this grid here is the one which is aligned with the Trinity River, and this grid here is from 1836 and is 45 degrees with the cardinal direction. So this point here is a really messy point in terms of urban design and street layout. So this is my impression as an European student of downtown here. So what I would say is that, of course, there's few people along the streets, not enough tree lines, green spaces. It's an automobile-centric city, and there's lack of entertainment, radio shops, bar clubs. And could be the tunnel system the right solution? In my opinion, I don't think so, but we will see. And then another feature is that there's a huge amount of car parking. So another interesting point for this area that made me choose this is that I strongly believe that the grid pattern, so the grid layout, is a really strong point for the next future, because the grid has been made like 100 years ago, and we still have. So why not keep on having this layout? I'm talking about the streets. And as you can see, what you can have is proximity, walkability, legibility, and also this organization can be even three-dimensional. So for example, parks can also be rooftop gardens, and you can duplicate this idea of having everything really close. So yeah, if this is home, you have park, office, entertainment, everything really close. And yeah, the objectives, the main aim of this project is to bring back people to downtown, and this can happen bringing back green spaces, restaurants, retail shops, tourist attractions, and schools. And so the strategy is based on three main points. The first one is removing the highway I-345. The second one is that Dallas has to go back to nature, and that means that I want to turn this transition place into a multifunctional green infrastructure. And then the third point would be strengthen the connection between the different areas, slowing down the pace. So the first point, so you might say, where are you going to put all the cars in the next future when the density will be much more than now? So the idea is that to diffuse the vehicle amount in the existing grid and also create some other streets that I will show you in a couple of slides. So my idea is that assuming that there will be automatic cars, there will be sharing cars, the total amount of vehicles will be less than now. So that's my assumption. Second point, as I said before, that Dallas has to go back to nature, and the idea is that when we make the second week group, we were talking about revealing the existing watershed, so which is a natural low point of the land of where Dallas is. So by excavating this, we can actually create this low point and this green infrastructure that is connected to the Trinity River watershed. So it's really important. And third point is slowing down the pace. That means that now, for example, if I want to move from downtown to Deep Ellum, I just go through like linear streets, which is Commerce Street, Main Street, and Elm Street. And also, this is just like I don't know if it's an English word, but monofunctional. So this has just one function, which is connecting people, connecting A to B. So we are not caring about the space. And for example, assuming that we can just create some curvilinear street, that creates automatically some kind of centralities. So that's what I'm aiming for. And yeah, that's the plan view of the green infrastructure, but let's see in details. So this diagram here is an only map that shows the difference between the built environment and the open space with streets included. And I shaped this new part of the city here that doesn't exist before. So what I really think that is important to say is that before, the highway was just disconnecting the city, and now this green infrastructure, which is substituting the highway, is actually creating land, is giving form to the city. So that's the point. And this is the street layout. As I was saying before, this is going to be, okay, if this is the previous track of the highway, so the streets can be now something like this, and like this, connecting and diffusing the vehicles through the grid. So this is the lowest point of this green infrastructure. As you can see, this is a little water stream. Then the more I move, the more it goes up. So for example, if we have like flutes here, this could be another layer with retaining ponds, and this create other kind of activities. And yeah, this one here is the farmer's market. And the last layer, which is the upper one, it is actually just open spaces and something that really connects this green infrastructure into the existing city, into the existing grid. And last but not least, I would say this is the pedestrian web. So you might think that this green infrastructure could be something nice, of course, because it's green and blue, but actually disconnect the city. But my idea is really that we have to connect people and create these new centralities with this web of connection and bridges. And these are some activities. So the idea was to connect Carpenter Park to Farmers Market. This could be, for example, an urban forest, and I'd like to have like as some kind of end of this path that starts from downtown to Deep Ellum, so we could have some kind of recreational park there. And this is going to be the area that I will focus on the next slides, which is this new public space. Another interesting point, in my opinion, is that what I want to do is to preserve this area here as some kind of urban oasis, so having this difference of scale between the next future city that will be high-rise building. So my idea is to have around this green infrastructure is to have these low-rise buildings that makes a difference for the future. So this is another sketch that shows this idea. And yeah, if this one here is the render. So another feature is that to have this kind of new typology of building that makes this step back of green rooftops. So for example, who lives here still have this kind of connection with this green infrastructure. So you don't have the view covered by another high building, but you have this kind of stairs, green stairs that brings you visually to the ground level. And last but not least, I would say is to giving character to this area. So this is a sketch of the view of downtown, and this is the core area of this pedestrian web. And, oops. Okay, so why not keeping some part of the highway, some portion of the highway to create some new urban design elements? So for example, if this is the old highway, this could be some pillars, and we can apply some kind of platforms and create new elements. For example, this can provide some noise, or could be used as with solar panels to have some bars, restaurants, and bring back some activities to the city. And why not having an old car museum? So why not having cars in museums in the next 100 years to celebrate the past century? And yeah, this is another view of this area. So as you can see here, this web actually overlays this green infrastructure that goes into the natural watershed. Yeah, this is a render that shows the quality of the urban environment, because I really believe that we need to make people go in there, and there has to be something with character, something that makes this part of the city different from other areas. And this could be, for example, as I said before, this Jurassic parking, or wherever it is. And yeah, thank you.
You know, I love the idea of the old car museum, and I can't help but think that that's like, you see these videos online, and I have a 6-year-old son, and you know, when he sees a rotary telephone, it's like he just doesn't understand it, right? And when you think where a car has come in 100 years, and 100 years further down the line, we may see the same reaction with people walking through, and you know, what is that, Dad? And, you know, there's something about the scale that you've created here that feels right. And I've seen a lot of people look at what could happen, you know, when you take this highway down and how you infill that. And to me, the scale is very important for that part, because you're trying to amplify a connection, and it's a connection that's there, it's just hindered. I do think that's one of the most important parts of the city that is unfortunately so severed. You know, and I think the way that you've started to address the future, you know, whether that was intentional or not, because I can't help but think, you know, at the south side of Central Park and the super tall buildings that are starting to come up right on the edge, you know, planning for that view corridor in advance. And then I like, you know, the stepping of the green roofs and starting to really think about how policy shapes that space. So those are very important things.
Thanks. Can you go back to the site plan, a couple slides before this? Yeah, so especially these, yeah, this one is great. I think that there's a really nice integration of this park into the urban fabric. I mean, I know you did it really intentionally, but I agree, a lot of the conversation about tearing down I-345 is very much so refilling exactly what is gone. You know, it's like highway and access roads and everything goes away, and then we put it back in. I like that you've pushed that further, and I think that, you know, it's quite beautiful. It feels, especially without seeing the green, it feels like a river should go there, right? Like that's naturally how a city would form around something and integrate with it really specifically. I like how it sort of is weaving into the city, and the buildings themselves are coming in. It's not just, yeah, it's not just a park that's sort of artificially there. It feels like it's become a part of a living city. And I think there's a nice nuance to the way that you have designed it in scale, have integrated this, have created the buildings to sort of go along with it. It's a much more holistic possibility of how this, I guess, exactly as you said, how it can sort of become a healing element to something that has caused a lot of scars in the city.
Yeah, I would agree with both comments before. I like how you started off, though, thinking about the grid, and that the grid would be equally important 100 years from now as it has been for 2,000, 3,000 years, and how you thought of it 100 years from now. Of course, the park idea is a very good one. What I like about it is the fact that it acts like a central park. I think a lot of our discussions today on the Trinity River and what that could become as our central park, you know, those might happen, but I think a lot less would need to happen in order for this idea to become our central park. We already have some of the urban fabric that could go right up against it, and you could see people walking right into it, just like your diagram showed. I like the fact that there's not only roads, but pedestrian connections through it and around it and between it. And then also that you've created spaces like this, the museum and other activity nodes that would draw people there, just like Central Park does with its zoo and other museums. So overall, I love the idea. I think out of all the ideas, although they're all good, I think this one is the one that I could personally see being the most feasible 100 years from now, because it takes a lot of the things that we know today and takes the assumption that our technology and the way we live 100 years from now might be different, to where you don't need as many cars, you may not need any cars, and it allows for something like this to become a reality. I really enjoyed this one.
Francois?
I think your presentation is very believable. In fact, what you do is you look at infrastructure and you reuse that infrastructure. Today, that's happening with low impact development. If you work in a watershed, an entire watershed of a city, where you try to do urban renewal, if you try to look at your water quality, if you want to open your channels and your pipes to become exposed again, and you take your properties that allow for open space and which you purchase property and you allow for open space and connective pieces, you can create similar to what you've created by just looking at the water infrastructure. And it's happening today, so I can see what you have is very, very believable and possible quite soon.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for your comments and agree with all of them. And I really want to say that my idea, I thought it was really grounded on the existing situation. So at the same time, I needed to find the balance between thinking really, really forward, but being grounded on this. So yeah, so that's the outcome. And thank you, everybody. And also I want to thank not really my old colleagues there, because I really think they're awesome people, and I really enjoyed this month with you guys. Really. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Our last presenter this evening, Joe. Oops.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Johanna, and I just finished my first year of MLA at the GSD, and I have a background in dance and furniture making, so I really appreciate your comment on the joinery. That was nice. And first off, I'd really like to thank Tian Wu and Michael from the Houston office, and also Xu Yi, because the ideas for this project were really, the impetus was developed in week 2, so thank you. Okay, so our society is facing changing social, climatic, and economic conditions. And currently, our cities are not able to move fast enough to accommodate these changes. So I believe that as we move into the 22nd century, it will be imperative that we design our cities so that they can be responsive to change at multiple scales. The scale of the pedestrian, but also the scale of the city in the face of natural disaster. I also believe that there will be a strong desire for people to connect with other people, to connect with the materials they consume, and to also connect with their environment. I am proposing to turn Cedars into a movable district that is adaptable in form and function. The architecture will be constructed of movable units, and the small scale of these units and the small scale of the block will create a strong pedestrian realm, which will create a stronger sense of connection and community, which I think is really important and we're missing currently. So I chose the Cedars District for 3 reasons. The strong artistic community that's there, the proximity to the river, and also its potential as a clean slate. As mentioned before, Cedars has a lot of old, irrelevant industrial buildings there, a lot of vacancy, so it seemed like a good site for a new project. This is a successional diagram that I've created that illustrates what a movable Cedars might look like in the case of a flood. So as we see, the movable units are actually able to work in response and take on a new spatial configuration due to the economic condition. So the beginning of this design starts with a network of fixed vehicular roads and flexible pedestrian streets. As you can see, the grid is tight and more rigid the further away it is from the river, and as you move towards the river, it begins to disintegrate. And this is to create a diversity of urban experience and also greater flexibility in the face of climate change. The network of buildings plug into the grid, and for optimal walkability, I've defined a half-mile radius circle to define 3 smaller villages within this village, or within this district. Oops. So the design has 4 main components. These are flexible module units, fixed and flexible roads, modular green spaces, and fixed green spaces. And for the optimal pedestrian experience, I've constrained each block by 150 feet and 150 feet. And these dimensions are actually taken from the Forbidden City in Beijing. As I mentioned before, there are 3 villages that are defined by half-mile radius. And for optimal walkability, we have all of the programmatic programs that would be necessary within each of those half-mile radiuses. This is a shifting grid that's demonstrated through Legos that talks about the horizontal and vertical planes. As you can see, the grid is shifting on the horizontal, and it begins to start to stack vertically. I think that this stacking can create the potential for multiple levels of pedestrian life. And as our cities become more dense, I think this sort of use and taking advantage of the vertical will be more and more important. So there's many scenarios in which this grid might shift. And one of them is a collaboration-based shift. The module units will allow for physical connections between artists, materials, and production industries to connect physically. There's also larger programmatic shifts. As the community evolves over time, they might decide that different urban designs will be required. In this succession, you see the community choosing different green space schemes. Another shift is based on microclimate. We often talk about Dallas and how cold or how hot it is, and what I'm proposing is to create a really, really strong pedestrian realm, and the question is, how will we stand the heat? So I think that these movable units can actually be used to create microclimates. Movable units could shift in the horizontal plane to create shade, or they could catch the water and create water cooling systems. In the cooler season, the buildings could stack vertically and create more sun exposed to the pedestrian realm, or create clusters for warmth. This is a plan view of the seasonal change. You see the stackable formation, the horizontal formation. And I think that these microclimates will be very necessary for an enjoyable pedestrian experience in Dallas particularly. So what I've described so far is a lot of flexibility. And I've also talked about that it's essential that these forms serve to basically support a strong sense of community in place. And because of this flexible system, you have to have fixed elements that anchor this in a sense of identity, place, memory. And so here's an example of one scenario. In this scenario, the community central green is fixed. This is a place that people can go to, their children will go to, and when they're 20 years, 50 years old, this will still be here. You have trees that are planted and rooted in this central space. There maybe are historical buildings. There are historical buildings that the community has decided are important, and the units have formed around these buildings. Residents have settled around the central community space, and there are also community buildings that are shared. These are facilities that produce products that are special to this neighborhood. And finally, cafes and restaurants have populated the central green. So, in conclusion, I think that too often the physical form of our city prevents us from changing. It also can keep us in stagnant cycles that no longer serve our society, like institutionalized segregation, vehicle centrality, or we can become victims of environmental degradation. I think this module system can keep us flexible and responsive at multiple scales. Thank you.
You know, what a beautiful, sympathetic response to so many of the issues that we have in an urban environment today. It's a very captivating idea, and I think to me the most interesting thing about it, and this may come from your dance background and thinking musically when you design, is the temporal nature of this. And I love that the rhythm and the speed of the change is going to ebb and flow based on what the people are doing and what's important at the time, and that's going to differ from the fixed elements of the city next to it. And I think just looking at that contrast, there's something really, really exciting about that we're not stuck with our space, you know, and it kind of opens up our eyes to understand that, you know, we can really shape everything about our existence and our experience here I think obviously, you know, there's technical challenges here, you know, there's some things, but this is 100 years in the future, so it's all figured out, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it last week. I love it this week. I mean, I think there's something really nice in the scale of the modules that you've chosen that, you know, they can sort of aggregate to become much larger spaces that we're used to. But the reality is that each one of them is very small and human scaled, and it's all kind of based around the people, which I think is, you know, I commented, I felt like specifically as an architect last week, and I don't know why it sort of makes me do it again, but I think buildings are so fixed and they can't adapt, and I think that you've really sort of hit on something that as an architect we always struggle with. Like, you want to be able to move and adapt to society that currently is changing so much faster than we can make buildings, and it's almost at the point now where you can start a project and society can change around you before you've constructed this building, and yet it was all defined 12 or 15 years ago, right? And I mean, it makes me think of sort of these ideas of consumerism, and that, you know, buildings don't have that same scale, and yet we're used to iPhones and apps, and I just think that this has so much potential to really be this kind of module future for what and how people want to live in a variety of ways. And it's not just 100 years in the future. This is 100 years plus the next 100 years, because it can continue to adapt so many different ways. So I think it's really rich, and I think the way you talk about it is quite compelling as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree again with the comments said so far. And one of the things I really like about this presentation and this idea is the fact that because of its simplicity and how it could even maybe test ideas, and you could use it today. You could use it today not only in the Cedars, but you could use it downtown in some of our parking lots. They could be placeholders for development in the future, as a way to have something there today that actually contributes to our public realm, to our lives, to maybe solve some of our social issues today. I think the idea works great in the way you've presented it in the Cedars, but I think it could work throughout our city today. So I think, to me, that was the most exciting piece of that. Yeah, I think I've seen some ideas that kind of get to that, to where you can move. You know, everybody's doing the container development, but this, I think, takes it to a different level. And I see this as something that could be done almost immediately. I think it's very exciting. Mm-hmm.
Michael, Joanna said you inspired her. Do you have any comments?
These projects have come a very long way in the last 2 weeks, and I think it's a testament to the students as well as the people that have been working with them. And one of the comments I kind of left them with at the end of week 2 was, you know, nobody knows what the future is going to be in 100 years. So think about, you know, the technological, social, and ecological issues that we're dealing with now, and project forward, and remember what our role as designers is. And that's not to design any one of those things, but to understand how they all kind of work together and inform each other. And so a lot of the solutions that we saw today are, you know, speculating about what technology is, but they're not really designing the technology itself, but they're kind of looking at how how it produces a new kind of social and ecological relationship. And so in that way, I think that the program has been very effective in sort of speculating about what our role in the future is as well. So excellent job.
Yeah. Any comments? Final ones?
Thank you. Just want to thank SWA. This was the most expansive program I've ever done. It's really great, really hard. And also especially my colleagues. I love all of you, and I think we'll probably be close forever, I think. Thank you.
You know, thank you so much, everyone. I think you can see the great depth of thought that's been put into their work over the last 4 weeks. We've asked a tremendous amount of these students. We've asked them to look at Dallas. None of them had ever been here before, and we've asked them to absorb all these things about the city and to somehow come up with ideas that would project us forward into something else. And you know, they really dug into this, and they did it with such seriousness and with such verve. And every week they produced something that they would have spent most of their semesters producing in school. And so, and that didn't come, you know, that there was a tremendous amount of help to get there. And I want to actually thank our colleagues. Some of them are here still today. Cinda and David and James and Michael, who they've come from offices across the country and actually even from Shanghai, Shuyi, to actually help these individuals get to where they are today. And for me, and I know for Chuck, it's felt to us like we're almost like birthing babies here, right? Slowly, we're producing something, and it's a great relief, but it's an honor for us to be able to work with you as well. So, we're just going to leave you with a few images here. Dallas, the first image here from 1910 to 1920. You see the beginning of the city, the vibrancy of this, and you move into the 1950s, and you see Dallas was just like a zenith in many ways, and then you move into the 70s through to 2015, and you see Dallas becoming, vacant and empty. But we're not vacant, and we're not empty, and we're dynamic, and we're designers, and we're residents of the city, and we love our place, and we really envision something else. And you can see the old mapping. We look at things in plan. We look at form. We look at texture. We look at the line. You can see, and when we combined, Donnie worked today to put these images together, and we took all of their work, and this is what's created. And could you imagine if Dallas looked like this? It's an organism, it's alive. All these pieces fit together. So these students who worked with, quite, discretion and on their own for the last 2 weeks were actually speaking to one another and sharing their ideas and influencing one another's. And ultimately, we end up with a product that feels like it could be a living system for a city potentially in the future. So that concludes our presentation. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
It's interesting, as someone who has been involved in this SWA program for, let's just say, more than 20 years, I think that Joe kind of summarized in the best way that I can ever remember someone summarizing when she proposed her thesis at the end of week 2 or beginning of week 3. She said, I would like to ask you just for a moment to spend what you understand as reality. And I think that's the essence of our program, in that this is future thinking and future world. And I for one, don't feel so worried about Dallas or the world after spending time with students that we do every year, because I realize that there's really young but brilliant thinking going on out there. And I look forward to my great-great-great-grandchildren living in a world that maybe is better as a result of these types of experiences. And I think that Dallas likes to think of itself as a world-class city. I'm not sure that it really is, but I think it can be based upon this type of thinking. And I really appreciate the summer students giving so much heart and so much time and so much creativity, and then suspending reality just for a few weeks. Good job, everyone.
We have a little bit of time left in this evening, so I ask that everyone get a glass of wine, grab a beer or water, and visit with the students in front of their boards for a couple of minutes. And we've been very kind, actually, in their comments. And I have to say, I've spent 4 weeks being really mean, and I know that, and so, ask them some tough questions. Spend a little bit of time and push them a little bit, because they have the answers. Once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to our colleagues. Thank you, gentlemen, for agreeing to be part of this today. We very much appreciate your time. And thank you to the students for enriching our lives for 4 weeks, and enjoy your time with your SWA colleagues in other offices. So it's a very rewarding experience. So thank you.